The Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. Highlights from the committee's inquiry into the regulation of public and private early childhood institutions in Trinidad and Tobago. The mandate of this committee includes investigating and reporting on all matters relating to the management, activities, administration, and operations of various state bodies, with a focus on education, health, gender, tourism, public administration, labor, culture, community development, and other social services. The 7th report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration was laid in the House of Representatives on Friday, March 22, 2024, and in the Senate on Monday, March 25, 2024. This inquiry sought to examine the regulatory framework that governs ECCE institutions in Trinidad and Tobago, evaluate the performance of centers inclusive of systems implemented to combat learning loss during the COVID-19 pandemic, examine the health and safety compliance of ECCE centers, as well as assessing the ECCE curriculum in relation to the preparation of children for primary school.
The committee found it important to look at an inquiry into public and private ECCE centers in Trinidad and Tobago because, as they say, a house is only as good as its foundation. And early childhood care is very important in terms of laying the foundation for a child's lifelong education. As they say, it's really good to start at the beginning of the educational process. So if we saw what was happening in that phase of the education, we could get a good sense of what was to come in a child's education. It's also in the public interest to look at this in terms of how it's being dealt with overall by the stakeholders, both public and private. A lot of emphasis is placed on primary and secondary care education, but if you don't get the early childhood care education right, it's a little more difficult when the child transitions to primary and secondary school care education. Early childhood care and education plays a foundational role in the child's social, emotional, and physical well-being. So the committee thought it was important to look at what structures were in place both at the private sector level and the public care level in terms of the government-administered schools to see what was happening, with a view to also assessing it and making recommendations as to how it can be improved. Going out to the site visits was very important for the committee because we wanted to get a first-hand view as to what was happening in both government-administered schools, early childhood care centers, and privately run centers. And the information was both shocking and alarming in some instances, but we also saw quite a lot of positives. And the feedback from those who are on the ground, the teachers, the support system, in some instances the parents, was very encouraging, but also showed that we have a lot of work to do to provide the necessary system of support for early childhood care centers in Trinidad and Tobago. The committee met with several important stakeholders in its interface and in its site visits. Of course, first of all, we met with the Education Ministry and the technocrats because that's very important. The Education Ministry is responsible or has overall responsibility for education at all levels in Trinidad and Tobago, including early childhood care level. We also met with the Tobago House of Assembly, the Children's Authority, MTS, and the Ministry of Health as important stakeholders contributing to early childhood care in Trinidad and Tobago. Some of the key findings that emerged included that 50% of all ECCE schools in Trinidad and Tobago are non-compliant with Ministry of Education requirements. This made for several significant discrepancies in the data held by the ministry, which would, of course, in turn impact policy decisions and how the ministry moves forward in terms of dealing with this sector. There were also issues with finding out the addresses of schools, the correct and current addresses of schools, and some of the other statutory requirements as required by the Ministry of Education. In terms of policy reform, during the second and final phase of the public hearings with the Education Ministry held in June 2023, it was revealed that the education policy from 2023 to 2027 provided some strategic and policy direction for early childhood care centers in Trinidad and Tobago. There were also some mechanisms for health and safety needs that needed to be strengthened. This was one of the outcomes of the strategic engagements, and an overall deficit in capturing health and safety data and compliance issues related to ECC centers throughout the country. Some of the quality issues we discovered in terms of the ECC centers in the country included: one, the quality of teachers and the standardization of that, the facilities and the infrastructure where these centers are housed, and also the importance of the involvement of parents in the whole process. One of the main findings also of the committee in terms of its interfaces with these centers throughout Trinidad and Tobago was the issues related to students with special needs and psychoeducational and developmental challenges, which really spoke to a deficiency in trained staff to support, which really spoke also to something that's come up over and over again, deficiencies at the student support services in Trinidad and Tobago of the Ministry of Education, which really drives the special needs intervention in the country. Some of the key recommendations based on our findings included, one, that the ministry consider conducting a nationwide data collection drive to gather updated information on all centers, all ECCE centers, with specific emphasis on the privately run centers. Two, to prominently publish procedures for reporting complaints related to the operation of early childhood care centers, especially on the Ministry of Education's website and on its social media portals. Three, in addition to checking for infrastructural compliance, the committee also recommends that the Ministry of Education conduct clinical assessments on the delivery of lessons to determine the quality of teaching so that it's standardized at various points in the academic year, and especially at the privately run ECCE centers. And four, to ensure there's increased strategic partnerships with private educational and developmental psychologists to meet the demands for comprehensive assessments and intervention plans at the ECCE levels. So what happens next is the Education Ministry has 60 days to respond to the recommendations contained in this report. Once the ministerial responses are submitted, they are laid in Parliament and made public on the Parliament's website. And also, you may review this and other reports from Joint Select Committees on the Parliament's website, www.ttparliament.org.
The Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration is dedicated to improving the lives of citizens through its work. For more information on this committee, visit our website at ttparliament.org, and you can email concerns and queries to JSC sspa@ttparliament.org. The Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. Highlights from the committee's inquiry into the regulation of public and private early childhood institutions in Trinidad and Tobago.